The schoolyard echoed with laughter, but it was not the joyful kind. It was sharp, cruel, and full of mockery. Ugly duckling. No one will ever love you. You should just hide your face forever. Emma, just 10 years old, stood frozen as a group of classmates pointed, whispering insults about her freckles, her glasses, her crooked teeth. She clenched her fists, swallowing back the tears. What none of them knew was that years later, the same girl they ridiculed would be walking down an international runway, proving them all wrong. This is the story of how she turned her pain into power. Emma never understood why she was treated differently. At 10 years old, she had already learned that looking different meant being an outsider. Unlike the other girls with shiny hair, clear skin, and bright smiles, Emma had wild curls that never stayed in place, oversized glasses that slid down her nose, and freckles covering her face like constellations. She did not think much of it until the other kids made sure she did. Lunchtime was the worst. While the other children gathered in small groups, whispering and laughing, Emma sat alone. She would push her food around on her tray, pretending not to notice the way the others glanced at her, smirked, and whispered. Some days, she wished she could disappear. When teachers asked the class to form groups, no one picked her. When she raised her hand to answer a question, she would hear the snickers before she even spoke. One day, she overheard two girls talking behind her. She looks like a broken doll. I bet even her own mirror does not want to see her face. Emma held her breath, willing herself not to cry. At home, she avoided mirrors. Each time she caught a glimpse of her reflection, she saw herself through their eyes. Her freckles looked too dark. Her teeth were too crooked. Her body felt awkward and small. One night, sitting on her bed, she finally asked her mother, "Mom, am I ugly?" Her mother's smile was sad as she brushed Emma's curls back. "You are beautiful in ways they cannot see yet." Emma wanted to believe her. She really did. But the world around her made it impossible. And soon, she stopped believing in herself at all. The school bell rang, signaling the start of English class. Emma sat quietly in the back, hoping today would be one of the days she could just blend into the background. But fate had other plans. "Emma, why don't you read the next passage aloud?" the teacher called. A wave of panic crashed over her. Not today. Not in front of them. Her hands trembled as she picked up the book. She tried to steady her voice, but the words stuck in her throat. The first sentence barely escaped her lips when a voice from the back of the classroom cut through the silence like a blade. Why is she even trying? Ugly girls don't belong here. Laughter erupted. Loud, merciless, unstoppable. Emma's face burned with humiliation. She tried to continue, but her hands shook too much to hold the book. She heard more whispers, more cruel remarks. Maybe if she wasn't so weird-looking, she'd have friends. I'd be embarrassed to be her. Her heart pounded painfully against her ribs. Her eyes stung. She couldn't do this. Without another word, Emma bolted from the classroom. She did not know where she was running, only that she had to get away. She pushed open the bathroom door, locked herself inside a stall, and finally let the tears fall. Everything they had said, everything they had laughed about, it was all true. She felt trapped in a body she wished was not hers. For the first time, she wished she could just disappear. That night, she sat in front of her mirror, staring at the girl she hated. If she could just change the way she looked, maybe they would stop. Maybe she could finally be enough. But deep down, she knew the truth. Nothing would ever be enough for them. At home, the world was quiet, but Emma's mind was not. The voices from school followed her into every corner of her house. She sat at the dinner table, barely touching her food. Her mother noticed. "Emma, sweetheart, is something wrong?" Emma shrugged. "I'm just tired." She wasn't tired. She was exhausted. Not from school, but from existing in a world where she never felt enough. She started speaking less, pulling away from her family. She spent hours alone in her room, staring at the walls, wondering why she wasn't like everyone else. Every time she passed a mirror, she looked away. If she didn't see herself, maybe she wouldn't feel so broken. One night, she stood in front of her reflection, the bathroom scissors in her hand. She took a deep breath. If she changed something, anything, would they stop? Her fingers trembled as she grabbed a handful of her wild curls. Snip. Strands of hair fell into the sink. She cut again. And again. When she was done, she stared at herself. Short, uneven, messy. But maybe, just maybe, this would make her different. Maybe she wouldn't look like the girl they laughed at anymore. The next morning, she walked into school, her heart hammering. She held her breath, waiting for a reaction. And then she heard it. Laughter. Again. She looks even worse now. Trying too hard won't make her pretty. Emma's stomach dropped. No matter what she did, it would never be enough. That night, she sat in bed, tears soaking her pillow. And for the first time, she stopped hoping things would get better. The days passed in a blur. Wake up. Survive school. Come home. Repeat. Emma had stopped expecting anything to change. But then, one afternoon, something did. Her art teacher, Ms. Lane, called her over after class. Emma, I noticed your drawings. She held up a sketch Emma had absent-mindedly left on her desk. Emma's stomach twisted. Was she in trouble? Ms. Lane smiled. This is beautiful. Have you ever thought about creating something bigger? Emma frowned. No one cares about what I make. The teacher sat beside her, flipping through a magazine on the desk. She pointed to a photo of a model in a bold, unique outfit. Did you know, Ms. Lane said, this woman used to get bullied for the way she looked? Emma's eyes widened. That couldn't be true. The model in the picture was confident, poised, stunning. She used to be called names just like you. But one day, she stopped listening. She realized that beauty isn't about being perfect. It's about owning who you are. Emma stared at the page. She had never thought of her quirks as something special, only as flaws. That night, she sat in bed, flipping through magazines and searching online. She found more stories. More women who had once felt like she did, but had become unstoppable. For the first time in her life, a tiny ember of hope flickered inside her. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as worthless as she thought. Maybe she could be more. Middle school came and went, and Emma learned an important lesson. The world was not going to change for her. So she had to change for herself. She stopped waiting for approval. She stopped trying to blend in. Instead of sitting in silence, she started speaking up in class. Instead of hiding in baggy clothes, she experimented with bold colors and patterns. At first, the whispers still followed her. But something was different. She didn't care anymore. The more she ignored them, the less power they had over her. And something strange happened. Some of the same people who once laughed at her now looked at her with curiosity. She was owning herself. By the time she turned 17, Emma had grown into her height. Her freckles, once the thing she hated most, had become her signature feature. She stood taller. She spoke with confidence. She was not the same girl who had once run from her reflection. Then, one day, her life changed forever. She was sitting in a small cafe, sipping coffee and sketching designs in her notebook. A woman, elegant and poised, sat down at the table next to her. After a few minutes, the woman leaned in and asked, "Have you ever considered modeling?" Emma froze. She let out a small laugh. "Me? A model?" The woman smiled. "Yes, you. There's something about you." She slid a business card across the table. "A modeling agency." Emma stared at it, her heart pounding. For years, she had been told she was ugly, invisible, not good enough. And now, a stranger was telling her she had something special? She spent days staring at the card, debating. Was this real? Could she actually be something more? Finally, with shaking hands, she dialed the number. She had no idea that her life was about to change forever. The day of the modeling audition, Emma stood in front of the agency's glass doors, her hands clenched into fists. What if they laughed at her? What if they saw her the way the kids in school did? She almost turned around. But then she heard Ms. Lane's words in her head. Beauty isn't about being perfect. It's about owning who you are. Taking a deep breath, she stepped inside. The agency was filled with tall, confident girls, their posture straight, their faces flawless. Emma felt out of place immediately. A woman with a clipboard approached. "Emma, you're up." Her legs felt weak as she walked toward the large white backdrop. A photographer stood behind a camera. "All right, let's see what you've got." Emma swallowed hard. She had no idea what to do. The camera clicked. She felt stiff, unnatural. Her insecurities screamed in her head. But then, the photographer suddenly lowered the camera. "You have the most unique freckles I've ever seen." Emma blinked. Freckles. The very thing she had been teased for. The very thing she had hated. "You're not like the other girls," the photographer said. "And that's why you're going to go far." Something shifted inside Emma. She lifted her chin, straightened her back. She was done hiding. The camera clicked again. This time, she was ready. For the first time, Emma felt powerful. The agency signed her on the spot. As she walked out of the building, she didn't just feel like a different person. She was a different person. She had spent her childhood running from who she was. But now, she was owning it. And this was only the beginning. Emma had spent years burying the voices of her past. but she never expected to come face to face with them again. It happened at a fashion event in her hometown. She was backstage, adjusting the final touches on her makeup when a voice behind her said, "Emma?" She turned, and there he was, Jason, one of the boys who had laughed the loudest when she was bullied as a child. The boy who had once told the entire class, "Ugly girls don't belong here." And now, here he was, staring at her in disbelief. Jason's eyes flickered with recognition and confusion. "You, Emma," he stammered, scanning her flawless posture, her confident expression, the way she carried herself like she belonged in this world. A smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. "Yes, and I'm just getting started." For the first time, he had no words. She didn't need his validation anymore. She had spent her childhood seeking approval from the wrong people. And now, she had learned she never needed it in the first place. As she walked away toward the runway, she didn't feel anger. She didn't feel hatred. She only felt freedom. Because proving him wrong wasn't about revenge. It was about proving to herself that she was always enough. She had won. The lights were blinding. The cameras flashed. The crowd buzzed with anticipation. Emma took her place at the start of the runway. She had walked smaller shows before, but this was different. This was the moment she had waited for her entire life. As the music pulsed through the speakers, she took her first step. Every stride carried years of pain, rejection, and self-doubt. Every step rewrote her story. She was no longer the girl who hid in bathrooms to cry. She was no longer the girl who avoided mirrors. She was no longer the girl who let others define her. She was powerful. She was beautiful. And the world was finally seeing her for who she truly was. The audience gasped in awe. Her freckles, once mocked, now set her apart. Her presence, once small, now filled the entire room. As she reached the end of the runway, she paused. She lifted her chin, staring straight into the cameras. She wanted every girl who had ever felt unworthy to see her. To know that this moment wasn't just for her, it was for them, too. Then, with a soft but knowing smile, she turned and walked back, owning every second. Backstage, as she removed her heels, a tear slipped down her cheek. Not because she was sad, but because she had finally become the person she was always meant to be. The world had once called her ugly. But now, she was the face of beauty. The runway lights had dimmed. The cameras had stopped flashing. The event was over. But Emma's journey? It was just beginning. She stood in front of a microphone, staring at a crowd of reporters, aspiring models, and young girls who had once felt just like her. She took a deep breath. And then she spoke. "If you had told 10-year-old me that I would be standing here today, I would have laughed. I would have told you that girls like me don't belong in places like this. Because for years, I believed that I wasn't enough. I believed the voices that told me I was ugly, unworthy, invisible. I let them define me, but not anymore." Emma glanced at the audience. She saw girls who looked like she once did. Timid, doubtful, afraid of taking up space. She spoke directly to them. To every girl who has ever been called ugly. To every person who has ever been made to feel small. You are more than their words. You are more than their judgment. And one day, you will realize that everything they said about you was wrong. The room fell silent. Emma lifted her chin, standing in the power she had fought so hard to claim. Beauty is not about being perfect. It's about owning who you are. I am proof that you don't have to change to fit the world. Sometimes, the world just needs to catch up to you. The audience erupted in applause. Somewhere in the crowd, a young girl with freckles and glasses wiped a tear from her cheek. She looked at Emma not as a model, but as hope. Emma smiled. She had come full circle. And now, it was someone else's turn to rise.